Hi, welcome to Armchair Philosophy. I'm Rubin and today we're going to be talking about the Apology of Socrates by Plato. If you've ever taken a class on the history of philosophy, or on ancient Greek philosophy, you've probably heard of Plato, or you've probably read something by him. Plato's 5 dialogues on the trial and death of Socrates are common reading materials in most philosophy departments in the US, but the Apology is often looked over. That isn't to say that the Apology is looked over in every single philosophy class, but many of the people who I met in college in philosophy departments didn't quite understand what it was for. If you're unfamiliar with who Plato or Socrates are, then you can watch my previous Armchair Philosophy episode, where I discussed the Socratic method. With that being said, let's proceed to the text itself. Apology covers Socrates' trial and his defense. The year is 399 BCE, and Socrates has been brought forth before an Athenian court on charges of corrupting the youth and not believing in the local gods. Lycon, Anytus, and Miletus have already spoken, and it's time for Socrates to deliver his defense. Plato, who's sitting in the audience, would write about it around 10 years later. Apology can be broken down into 3 parts. First, Socrates' defense, then his judgment, and then finally his punishment. His accusers were well prepared, having flowery rhetoric and strong, though false, accusations. Socrates says that he isn't a great speaker, but that he'll tell the truth, and he hopes that the Athenians won't hold his plain speaking against him. During the time, dismissing oneself as a rhetorician was a common tactic in Athenian courts, and some have suggested that Socrates' doing that here is supposed to be ironic. I don't believe that's necessarily the case, though, since Socrates claims not to have a strong understanding of the court system, and also Plato has a very strong bias against sophists. In fact, Plato's disdain for sophistry can be seen throughout the entire work. Lycon, who spoke before Socrates, was supposed to be representative of the rhetoricians. Part of the charge of impiety was that Socrates was an atheist who taught only physical explanations for things. While Socrates does take seriously enough the words of the Delphic oracle who said he was the wisest of all men to live a lifestyle that would actively test that, he says he's not interested in figuring out explanations of the workings of the gods. He doesn't hold anything against anyone who is interested in those things, but he just isn't. This separates him now from both the sophists who tried to make the weaker argument the stronger through flowery rhetoric, and also the pre-Socratic philosophers who were physicalists, such as Thales or Pythagoras. But Socrates is not an atheist. He states later that he believes in the supernatural and thus also believes in supernatural beings, namely gods and their children, demigods. Furthermore, Socrates isn't really a teacher. In fact, in other dialogues, it's established that he might not even believe in the concept of teaching. Some of what Socrates is responsible for is then brought up. He had a bad reputation and pissed a lot of people off. To test what the oracle had said about his wisdom, Socrates would go around trying to find anyone who claimed to be smart or wise or who was held in high regard for being smart or wise, and would converse with them until finally getting to the point where he figures out that they're not really that wise and also that they don't even understand their own ignorance. This feeds into the claim that Socrates was indeed the wisest because he recognized his own ignorance while others didn't. But it did make him a lot of enemies, which surely followed him into the courtroom as many people resented him. The definition of a philosopher is then briefly brought up. To Socrates, a philosopher is someone who thinks clearly and precisely, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with accumulated knowledge. That is to say that unlike the scientist who affirms knowledge in a sort of sense, the philosopher's goal is kind of to clarify it, according to Socrates. Having addressed the claim of impiety, Socrates then moves on to the charge of corrupting the youth, where he cross-examines Miletus. Socrates asked Meletus for a standard by which someone can be said to be a good influence, and Meletus said that it's those who represent the laws, further expanding it to be both assemblymen and counselors. But the assembly was open to all adult men in Athens. So, for Meletus's claim to be consistent, he would essentially be saying that all adult men in Athens are good influences with the sole exception of Socrates. He then points out that corrupting the youth would harm the city, which would eventually in turn harm himself. So, any corruption must have been unintentional. And being unintentional, Socrates thinks that he deserves to be taught, not punished. The jurors didn't agree. In a close vote, 221 to 280, Socrates is found guilty, and a death penalty is suggested. When asked what his punishment should be, Socrates says that it should fit his crime. Since he has freely offered his services to the city for many years, he should be offered free meals for the rest of his life. But that was taken more of as a joke. Socrates suggests then that he should pay a fine of about 100 drachma. A drachma is the currency that they were using at the time. Now, his pupils and his friends have already gathered together about 3,000 and are willing to push it forward to have Socrates released, but unfortunately the jury decided against that. Not liking Socrates' suggestion, the punishment vote then came back. According to Diogenes, the margin was much wider this time. 140 people agreed with Socrates that he should be fined, but this time 360 people voted that he should be put to death. Socrates then responds with two final speeches. To the ones who voted to put him to death, he says that he's a 70-year-old man and he would surely died soon anyway, but now his death is on their hands. He also notes that he could have chosen to be more of a sophist and appealed to emotions, and that probably would have won him the case, but he chose against it. The act of questioning and doing philosophy in general is really the problem that the Athenians have, and killing Socrates isn't going to do them any good. In the end, his position is that they've really harmed themselves more than they've harmed him. To those who moved to acquit, he had a few things to say. First, he said that his daemon never said not to do this, so the outcome must be for the best. Now, the daemon was a supernatural entity that Socrates claimed to have contact with. Death to Socrates is unknown, but could be one of two things. Either a very deep sleep or a change of location. Now, a very deep sleep would be very peaceful, so Socrates doesn't have any problem with that. And if the Greek afterlife is true and Socrates were to go to Hades, well, then he'd be able to discuss with all of the greatest philosophers and all of the greatest heroes whatever he wants, much in the same way that he bothered the people of Athens. So he's really no worse off either way. Apology demonstrates the rhetorical devices used by Plato splendidly. At times, it's a very formal speech, which might be given out as a lecture. And at other times, it's a very clear representation of the Socratic method. It distinguishes philosophy from sophistry throughout. It also cracks at the fundamental irrationality of human nature and the flaws of democracy. In particular, the judgment by the Athenian court demonstrates the problem with logical fallacies and inherent biases. Moreover, today it serves as what is considered to be the most accurate account of who Socrates actually was historically. The trial and death of Socrates must have been very well known to philosophers in Greece. Aristotle, a student of Plato, had to flee Athens after the death of his once pupil, Alexander the Great. In 322 BCE, Aristotle was accused by two Athenians for the same charge of impiety. Fearing the same response, Aristotle was forced to flee Athens. He went to his mother's home in Chalcis and died later that year of natural causes, requesting to be buried next to his wife. Less than 80 years before, in 399 BCE, Socrates was sentenced to death by the ingestion of hemlock. We at Milwaukee Atheists hope you have enjoyed this video and found it informative. Please like, comment with your thoughts, and if you want to keep up to date, subscribe or follow our website, MilwaukeeAtheists.com. If you really want to support us, get on Patreon and give us a donation. We've got some Patreon-only content coming out soon, and it's going to be exciting, so stay tuned. Also, later on this week is MythCon, so we're going to be there. Come on down. We'll have a great time. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.